die facing our foes. Make them bleed while we can.
Make them pay through the nose.
Make them pay for every man. Let others rise to take our place until the earth is free.
Les Miserables in its first form was a shorter and different show. It opened at Le Palais des Sports in Paris in September 1980, directed by a French director called Robert Hossein, and lasted there for 100 shows in a 4,000-seater, which was a sports arena, because unfortunately we didn't have or couldn't find the kind of theater where it could have been held as a straight theater play. So it was a huge success, because in 100 shows there were 500,000 people who saw it. The show closed because of a previous booking by the Moscow State Circus, if I remember well, with something like 50,000 people wanting to see the show and who couldn't get tickets. And that's how it finished in Paris, until we met Cameron MacIntosh 2 years later, who had never seen that show in Paris.
We were very disappointed because when the show stopped in Paris, because of course after we were alone together with the baby with us, you know, and we hoped that somebody will have the show on once again. We were trying and waiting for, but as everything important in your life arrived, it was a mixture of will and chance.
A Hungarian director came into my office about 6 months after I'd opened Cats in London and handed me this album and said, look, this is Les Miserables. I think if you can cope with T.S. Eliot's Cats, maybe this novel would be something you'd be interested to do as a musical. And I thought, Les Miserables, it's a French musical, sounds like a contradiction in terms. And I was vaguely intrigued. I'd vaguely heard of it too, but didn't think much of it. But a few days later, I was doing nothing at home, and I decided I'd put it on. And I remember that it was at 11:03 on a Thursday morning in my apartment, and by the fourth track, I thought, my God, this is the most wonderful musical I've heard for years. I never originally had any idea of doing Les Miserables at the Barbican. When I heard it, my immediate impulse was that this was a piece for Trevor Nunn. Trevor made two very strong suggestions about doing Les Miserables, and one was that we did it first at the Barbican Theatre, because he felt that that rehearsal process would be invaluable to the creation of this show. and secondly, that his collaborator from Nicholas Nickleby, John Caird, do the show with him. And I'd just done Song and Dance with John Caird, so I knew and liked him very much. So both suggestions I pounced on with alacrity.
Well, Jean Valjean, the story is very simple. He's a man who is imprisoned for 19 years for stealing a loaf of bread, which, according to the law at the time, was a perfectly just thing because he keeps trying to escape. And his struggle is the struggle of a potentially violent man to control the beast in himself and become good.
We've been incredibly lucky to have been blessed with some brilliant Jean Valjeans all the way around the world. Our original London and Broadway star, Con Wilkinson, the great Irish troubadour, was followed by a marvellous country and western singer, Gary Morris. And in Tel Aviv, marvellous Israeli cantor, Dudu Fisher, is currently wowing them, and looks like he'll be playing Valjean indefinitely there. With all these wonderful performances all the way around the world, I felt it was time to capture some of these on one complete symphonic recording. The difficulty has been making the choice. The reason we're doing a symphonic recording grew out of my original thought of doing an Australian cast album, so that there would be one version which had every note in it, because the London and Broadway productions only have 85 minutes on it, whereas there's actually 2 hours and 40 minutes of music in Les Miserables. And as it's now succeeding beyond my wildest dreams, I thought there might be enough Les Mis freaks in the world to want to have every note of it.
Martin, it's a bit too fast. It's ba 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 da da wa boom bam, very heavy. All that must be very heavy. It's too da 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 da. Ba da da ba da da ba da da ba boom 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 ba boom 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 ba ba ba.
Here we go. 1, 2. Take 4.
Meet the best innkeeper in town. As for the rest, all of them crooks, rooking the guests and cooking the books. Seldom do you see honest men like me, a gent of good intent, who's content to be master of the house, doling out the charm, ready with a handshake and an open palm. Tells a saucy tale, makes a little stir. Customers appreciate a bon vivant. Glad to do a friend a favour. It doesn't cost me to be nice, but nothing gets you nothing. Everything has got a little price. Master of the house, keeper of the zoo, ready to relieve them of a sou or two. Water in the wine, making up the weight, picking up their knickknacks when they can't see straight. Everybody loves a landlord, everybody's bosom friend. I do whatever pleases Jesus when I bleed them in the end. Master of the house, quick to catch an eye, never wants a passerby to pass him by. Servant to the poor, a butler to the great, comfort of philosopher and lifelong mate.
First of all, we decide, Alain and I, because in the middle of the dramatic story and very sad, we decide to turn the Thénardier into a kind of comic characters, which is not in the book. So we always thought that the Thénardier will going to arrive on the stage to relax the audience, because it's a very heavy show from that point of view. So for Master of the House, it was a kind of song to drink. And I wanted that song heavy as an Australian beer.
Yeah, there's a very good reason the Thénardier are innkeepers anyway.
Yeah, so it was a very...
Residents are more than welcome. Bridal suite is occupied. Reasonable charges plus some little extras on the side. Charge them for the lice, extra for the mice, 2% for looking in the mirror twice. Here a little slice, there a little cut, 3% for sleeping with the window shut. When it comes to fixing prices, there are lots of tricks in those. How it all increases, all the bits and pieces. Jesus, it's amazing how it grows. Master of the house, quick to catch your eye, never wants a passerby to pass him by. Servant to the poor, a butler to the great, comfort a philosopher and lifelong mate. Everybody's boon companion, give them everything I've got. Dirty bunch of geezers, Jesus, what a sorry little lot.
I used to dream that I would meet a prince, but God Almighty, have you seen what's happened since? Master of the house isn't worth me spit, comforter, philosopher and lifelong shit. Cunning little brain, regular Voltaire, thinks he's quite a lover, but there's not much there. What a cruel trick of nature, landing me with such a louse. God knows how I've lasted living with this bastard of the house.
Master of the house,
Master and a half,
comforter, philosopher,
don't make me laugh.
servant to the poor, butler to the great.
Hypocrite and toady and inebriate.
Everybody bless the landlord, everybody bless his spouse, everybody raise his loss.
Rising at the master's house.
Everybody raise the glass to the master of the house.
what is on display on all the stages in the world where Les Miserables is on is a company, an ensemble, a group of actors who have been trained to be an ensemble and to think as a group, and to have agreed amongst themselves with the directors that they are to be representing on stage not just the characters they're playing, but what Victor Hugo is all about, what the musical is all about, what the novel is all about. So that when they address the audience on subjects that are to do with a choral response, whether it's a political or an emotional moment in the show, an audience should get the feeling that they are being spoken to authorially. I mean, from Victor Hugo's point of view.
Victor Hugo was the most famous man of his time. Victor Hugo has lived through an event that very few men has been living through their own life. He's been attending, witnessing, I mean, his own triumph, organized by the population of Paris. Him being at his balcony, because he was the highest and most respected political figure of his time. And he had his birthday, I think his 85th or 84th birthday, just 2 years before his death. And he was at his balcony on the avenue which became since Avenue Victor Hugo, witnessing the people of Paris paying him respect and homage just, you know, by coming under his balcony.
What did I know of Victor Hugo? Well, I'd read some of his works before. I'd read Les Miserables before. I think I read it when I was about 14 or 15, and it had a great impression on me. Little did I know then that I would be musicalizing it. I probably would have been horrified to hear that I'd been musicalizing it if I'd known then that such a thing was to happen.
Well, I was fortunate enough to be chosen to write the English version being the universal version now, because all other productions running around the world are based on the London production. The work that I did for Les Mis can be described by any terms other than direct translation. It's a term I absolutely reject. About a third of the piece might be described as translation of a kind, rough translation, following the line of the story was, of course, important to the project. Another third might be described as a rough adaptation, and the other third might be described as original material, because there are at least 6 or 7 songs now in the show that didn't exist in the original French production at all. Cole Porter once said that the only motivation he needed to write a musical was a phone call from the producer, and I agree with that practical approach. When the lyric writing assignment was offered to me on Les Miserables in January of '85, I was writing television criticism for the Daily Mail. I managed to take 6 months off from the paper because I knew I couldn't possibly do both. I retired to this very room where I'm sitting now, took the phone off the hook, metaphorically, and went to work. It is at this desk that the evil deed was done.
All I can say is that for me, there was just something about the music which said to me, this is great theatre music. I mean, I get sent lots and lots of musicals, and most of it shouldn't ever be on the stage. But the music of Les Miserables cried out to go on the stage, and in fact, my only knowledge of Les Miserables was really the famous Charles Laughton movie, and the music seemed to paint those pictures. It seemed to remind me of sequences from that movie. And that's the most important thing for me whenever I decide to do a musical. I've got to think, God, this is terrific, and actually sung and acted on a stage, it will be 10 times better.
For Little Cosette, I wanted to have a very simple melody, a sad melody, but at the same time fitting very well with the rest of the score, kind of operatic flavor. So that's why I started. It's very classical at the same time, but very easy for a child to be singing.
We cast an overseas production in exactly the same way as we did the original. The only advantage is we have a much more clearly defined knowledge of what we're looking for. And each production changes. The advantage of coming to somewhere like Vienna is that mostly there are not any other shows for the actors to compete for, and we try to get the best talents from all over the country to come up for the show. And there aren't many other shows like this, so it attracts people who would not normally get the chance to be in a show like this. The production also is incredibly popular. I mean, bearing in mind that there are only 5 million inhabitants in the entire country, I believe in the first 6 months, and it's a 700-seat theatre, 10% of the population already been to see it.
En annan dag, eit anna lagnas blad, den endeløse veg til Golgata. De menn som trulig kjenner meg vil ganske sikkert prøve seg en gang til. Skal jeg kjære utan deg? Jeg har ikke levd for denne timen en dag til.
I chose Oslo because they asked. Also, I'd been to see a local production of Cats, which was very successful there. They did that, and I didn't actually think it was as good as the original. So I said if they were interested in doing Les Miserables, that we would want to do a full London/Broadway production there, which they had never done. No Scandinavian country had ever done anything on that scale, and so. When they agreed to that, we decided to go there and do the first European production there.
Om de vil sjå eie blå. Så det går jeg bort, slå det når det er fylt. Ditt å være oss på slik en fyllekveld. Først en liten dytt, så en liten sving. Mange er på til og vekker ingenting. Dagen før en fyllekveld, ja, takk for vin og brød. Jeg vil være trå, jeg vil være trå.
I'm particularly fond of the Rock Theatre in Budapest because I think they're very brave and they're very adventurous, and I think that they're the only Eastern Bloc country that has a modern rock theatre as an entity in itself. and they write a lot of their own rock shows, and they're terribly interested, and have been for several years, in doing the sort of musicals which are evolving in the West. And I've seen Jesus Christ Superstar and Evita there, and I got to know them very well. And they were very, very keen, and one of the first people to ask us to do Les Miserables. And they, I discovered, had a summer festival, which was very intriguing for us, where they were going to start the show, where there was a 6,500-seater auditorium, and they were going to do it with a cast of 150 and a huge orchestra, and we, quite frankly, couldn't wait to get on the plane to see what they would do with it. It was also the very first production that wasn't like ours, and I was delighted that they had such a triumph with it. The Summer Theatre is a stadium, the Rake Stadium, in front of the most fabulous cathedral, where they build a stage, and so you have a most dramatic backdrop, which they illuminate, and they do it late at night, and have a wonderful sound system. And it has a great sense of the epic. Look, it's sort of Budapest's version of doing it in a Greek amphitheatre.
I smell women, smell them in the air. Think I'll drop my anchor in that harbour over there.
Lovely ladies, smell them through the smoke. 7 days at sea can make you hungry for a poke.
Even stokers need a little stoke.
Waiting for a bite, waiting for the customers who only come at night. Lovely ladies, ready for the call, standing up or lying down or any way at all. Bargain prices up against the wall. Lovely ladies, waiting in the dark, ready for a thick one or a quick one in the park.
Long time, short time, any time, my dear. Cost a little extra if you want to take a year.
Quick and cheap is underneath the gear.
Szép hosszú haj, szép hosszú sejmes és dús. Ha eladnád, 2 frankot kidobnék rá. Hadd vágyjam hát, ne bántson, engedjen el. Túl kevés rá, legyen hát 10 frank az ár. Gondold meg jól, úgy kell a pénz, jól gondold át. Nincs másom már, fizetnem kell 10 franktán még, megment Cosette.
Lovely Ladies is a scene which came after a very sad song, which is I Dreamed the Dream, J'avais rêvé d'une autre vie in French at that time. And we are trying to find a way not to have another difficult, sad moment, because it was already 15 minutes that the show had started, having at the same time some exciting scene, some exciting musical moment with a complete different mood, and at the same time not being funny, because there was nothing to be funny about, because Fantine was going to die in the next 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and she was going to sell her hair, and she was going to sell her teeth, and she was going to sell herself to end it.
You know, when people are very talented, after 5 minutes you completely forget a foreign language, because we saw it in Japanese, in Hebrew, and it is very fast we forget completely the foreign language, and as it's much better for us to have a musical in the language of the country, you know, as they used to do before with the opera. For instance, Puccini opera was always in the language of the country, in French, in France, in Spanish, and Puccini wanted, because he wanted people to understand the lyrics.
Les Miserables presented a couple of enormous challenges. One was that we could find ways of doing staging that were very much like Nickleby. But in some ways, there was a difference. There was this one huge requirement, which it was that in the second act, the company had to build a barricade on stage, and there had to be 2/3 of the second act had to take place on this barricade. And it had to be very real, and it had to be very large. I mean, it was a staging object, a sculptural object. This is the barricade. It's really just a conglomeration of wooden objects. It basically is in two pieces that are driven across the stage and tilt 45 degrees. They don't look as if they're going to tilt when you first see them. I suppose that's the reason people find them so dramatic, is the scale of them and the fact that they move laterally and then, as it were, bend their backs and fall down to the ground. It makes a wonderful dramatic moment, something that you can only do once or twice in any show.
The whole idea of revolution is a very, very difficult one because, of course, we are dealing with a student insurrection of 1832 and not the French Revolution. And the French Revolution was 40 years before that, over 40 years before. And so one of our first tasks was to try to disentangle an audience's perception of revolution, to get to stop them thinking automatically that we were dealing with the French Revolution of Tale of Two Cities and 1789. Victor Hugo himself doesn't do that very well in the novel. He makes a lot of assumptions. The reader of the novel knew that at the time when these insurrections were happening in Paris, life was appalling for the vast majority of the population. So Hugo didn't need to underline that part of it.
I believe that within almost a week, the first printing was sold out, and they had to keep reprinting it. And in fact, when we were opening the show in Washington, just before we did the Broadway tryout, we discovered that because the American Civil War was taking place more or less at the same time as the novel came out, I think within 2 years, and all Robert E. Lee, the Confederate soldiers, had a copy in their saddlebags of Les Miserables, and in fact, to the point, his soldiers were rechristened Les Miserables, because it was the novel which is what really represented everything that they were fighting for.
Paris on the barricade has many hesitations. He's in love with Cosette on one side and would like to go and see her because he doesn't know what's going to happen to him and to their love. And on the other hand, he's Enjolras' best friend, and he's one of the fighters on the barricade. So he decides at the end of Act 1 to stay on the barricade, and because that's where his duty is. But you must understand, this is a gang of young students having drinks and fighting, like around a fire camp. It's not really a war. And he hires Eponine to get a message to Cosette so that she knows where he is. In fact, Valjean gets the message, doesn't show it to Cosette, and comes himself to the barricade, where he prefers to die rather than to lose his adopted daughter, Cosette.
And now I'm all alone again, nowhere to turn, no one to go to. Without a home, without a friend, without a face to say hello to. And now the night is near, now I can make believe he's here. Sometimes I walk alone at night when everybody else is sleeping. I think of him and then I'm happy with the company I'm keeping. The city goes to bed and I can live inside my head. On my own, pretending he is beside me. All alone, I walk with him till morning. Without him, I feel his arms around me. And when I lose my way, I close my eyes and he's found me. In the rain, the pavement shines like silver. All the lights are misty in the river. In the darkness, the trees are full full of starlight, and all I see is him and me forever and forever. And I know it's only in my mind, and I'm talking to myself and not to him. And although I know that he is blind, still I say there's a way for us. I love him, but when the night is over, he's gone. The river's just a river. Without him, the world around me changes. The trees are barren everywhere, the streets are full of strangers. I love him, but every day I'm learning. All my life I've only been pretending. Without me, this world will go on turning. A world is full of happiness that I have never known. I love him. I love him. I love him, but only on my own.
Valjean and Marius were the only two survivors on the barricade when the barricade fell. And Valjean has saved Marius by carrying him on his back to liberty, to freedom through the Paris sewers. He finally has coped with the idea for Marius becoming his son-in-law, and the two of them are married, and everyone seems to be very happy, except that Valjean then decides to tell the truth to Marius about his past, which means to say that he used to be a convict, that he has been, his real name is Jean Valjean, and he was a convict in the past. And he decided that he wants to leave them against Marius' wishes. He leaves the house. In fact, he leaves to go and die on his own. During the wedding, which he doesn't attend, arrives Thénardier, who in fact in the sewers, has reconverted himself into someone who was stealing rings and gold and tooth and anything from the people who were dying during the barricade time. And he had taken that ring from Marius' finger. And at the wedding, he comes back, shows the ring to Marius in order to try to sell it to him. But Marius recognizes the ring, and doing so, understand that Jean Valjean has been his savior on the barricade.
Alle tanna full. Unnskyld meg, monsieur, du trenger ikke lenger nå. Gir en grunn til deg jeg er, mer i pavens konge, mer i bomsens bank. Her med slam og blod at mus er fars beste far. Jeg lukta gir en salig rus. Ja, noen må jo gjøre rent igjen. Like små på gater, lovorden snudd opp ned. Byen må jo ha valsansvarsmenn. Gjelder søppel her jeg med. Ting. Synd å la han ligge, ja det ville våre lei. Takk for alt som jeg får ta, for jeg tar det ur. Ja, du har et tur. Et kort liv er en uting, men et kort og godt er greit. Bare klokka tikker bra. Ja, noen må jo få vekk ruske her. For raske skal jorda sånn at nye liv får gro. Men det trengs litt skjellnad til det vær. Et smett bærbått av blod. For han er like daud som han er. Jeg ser mot himmelen, alt jeg ser der månen som glår på meg. Jeg ser på
It opened at the Barbican Theatre on, I think, October the 7th, 1985. And it was an extraordinarily tense opening because it's an enormously long show, and we ended up with only having about 7 previews. And there were masses of sequence that had to be telescoped after a 10-week rehearsal period. But it was, in the end, I believe, exactly the right place for Les Miserables to have been done, because I think the development of the material needed that unique contribution that a great subsidised company can give you in the way that people approach the work, as opposed to just rehearsing in a rehearsal room for a commercial show. But it was a unique thing in that the arrangement between myself and the Royal Shakespeare Company was such that all my top staff people who were working on a musical worked at the RSC or with the RSC. And what we got, I think, out of the RSC was the art, and what we put into the RSC was the expertise, because it could never be treated like the RSC's fun end-of-term musical. It had to have all the disciplines of a full-scale musical stroke opera. And I think that's why it's worked.
The critical response was very, very interesting. Standing in this very conservatory above the Barbican, we had our first night party, and it was a tumultuous occasion. Everybody was very, very happy, and there was a buzz in the air. The audience and actors and entrepreneurs alike had all felt that we had achieved something very remarkable, very special, fresh, new. Nothing had happened anything like it before. We had just had an absolutely massive standing ovation at the end of the show, and we were right up in the air. So we were not prepared for the next day, when we were manifestly dumped on by the British critics, most of them. And it was a very interesting response, because the posh papers said that we had trivialized one of the greatest works of Western literature, that great novels like Les Miserables were not to be tinkered with, and they were not the proper subject for musicalization. The tabloids agreed between themselves that we had perpetrated a gloomy, dull, endless evening, which wasn't what musicals were about at all. Musicals should be light and frothy and frivolous evenings that sent everybody away happy and humming the tunes. So we fell about as resoundingly and noisily between two stools as any theatre company can ever have done. The audience response, on the other hand, continued to be ovationary.
We opened at the Barbican with a slightly below average advance, which was less than a third of the booking period for the 8 weeks we were there, than they would normally have for any major new Shakespeare in the autumn season. And which made me laugh when all the critics wrote, you know, when they didn't like it, that this was an obvious commercial ploy of the RSC. How dare they sell their birthright? We're doing this obviously commercial musical, which it wasn't.
So we had a few very nervous days when we were deeply worried about our transfer chances. And Cameron MacIntosh went around looking white as a sheet, wondering how many of his houses to mortgage in order to pay for the transfer. And in the end, well, just a few days later, it became absolutely apparent that the audiences were disagreeing with the critics
I remember having my traditional post-opening lunch, and we all arrived at 12:30, and the candles had become very black indeed on the table. And I thought, I'll get the worst of it out of the way. I will ring the box office and find out just how badly we're doing after these dreadful notices. And I got through eventually, and they said, how on earth did you get through? We'd just had the biggest day in the history of the Barbican and sold 5,000 tickets in the first 3 hours. And that was the first real indication I had that Les Miserables was going to be a popular success and not one made by the critics. In fact, history was repeating itself with the birth of the original novel. When the show went to America, we had, in fact, to sell it twice. We had to sell it once in Washington at the Opera House, where it was going for 8 weeks before we opened on Broadway in March '87. And we also obviously had to pick up an advance in Broadway. The main way that we did that was to complement the word of mouth that was already coming over and the very good notices that we'd received in things like Time and Newsweek and the New York Times by putting together a film which was just a 6-minute sort of dip into the story of Les Miserables. We just used stills from the London production and some of the very evocative music, and we made this film and showed it to the group sales representatives both in Washington and New York, and that was one of the main reasons that we were able to build up such an impregnable advance. I mean, it did open with, at the time, the biggest advance that Broadway had ever had, and I was delighted that it was eclipsed by Phantom.
Do you hear the people sing, singing the song of angry men? It is the music of a people who will not be slaves again. When the beating of your heart echoes the beating of the drums, there is a life about to start when tomorrow comes.
Will you join in our crusade? Who will be strong and stand with me? Beyond the barricade, is there a world you long to see?
Then join in the fight that will give you the right to be free.
Do you hear the people sing, singing the song of angry men? It is the music of the people who will not be slaves again. When the beating of your heart echoes the beating of the drums, there is a life about to start when tomorrow comes. Will you give all you can give so that our banner may advance? Some will fall and some will live. Will you stand up and take your chance? The blood of the martyrs will water the meadows of France. Do you hear the people sing, singing the song of angry men? It is the music of the people who will not be slaves again. When the beating of your heart echoes the beating of the drums, there is a life about to start when tomorrow comes.
You did it. Thank you, Cameron.
He's got the best profile.
I think I'm going to stay here all night. Do that.
I was thrilled with it, and I mean, it was an amazing reception. It's extraordinary here because you never expect how long the reaction is going to go on at the end, and I think it's because it's an opera town, isn't it, Peter?
Yes, I know the audience in Vienna, and it was extremely, because it's not a tradition to have standing ovations for such a long time, and the bravos, and so I think it's a big success.
Well, they tell me that the Viennese audience are polite and quiet,
but they didn't represent that tonight at all. It must have gone on for 10, 15 minutes. Quite incredible.
It seems it's going to carry on around the world. There are at least another 15 productions planned over the next 2 to 3 years, and in 3 years' time we start making what I hope will be a very exciting movie musical of it. So I'm afraid the world's going to be a miserable place for a long time to come.
Les Miserables has to be one of the greatest stories in the world ever. And it's just put together so well. Everybody likes a good cry, and this is it. It's a wonderful show.
I think in Jean Valjean, everybody can be involved in Jean Valjean, because Jean Valjean is a part of what's good in you. And at the same time, Javert is a part of the worst that you have in yourself. And in your heart, you have everybody, you know. You have Cosette too, because sometimes you can feel like a little Cosette. You have the Thénardier too. That's the magic of Victor Hugo.
The amazing thing is to see all these people in all these countries, which are 35 countries in the world where the novel is in sale, and now 13 where the musical is acclaimed, receive exactly at the same moments, give the same reactions, receive the same joy, the same laughter, or the same sadness at exactly the same moments. This is kind of genius, which I hope we have been able to spell out. But of course, that was his.
The magic in Les Miserables, I think, will always be personal. I think the only reason people go to see anything on this scale is because it's different. I think the reason people are going in so many droves and going so often to see it again is because it is very rare in popular entertainment to have something both entertaining, thrilling, and moving. And it's actually, you come out of the theatre feeling that you've learnt something about yourself and about your fellow man. And that's without being pretentious. The show isn't pretentious. I think the brilliant job Alain and Claud-Michel have done is to write a truly popular work which never once betrays its original source material. And I believe if Victor Hugo saw it, he'd be very proud of it.